Hi everyone, welcome to the Princeton Review's webinar, The Road to Business School, GMAT versus GRE. My name is Scott, and I'll be co-hosting today's presentation with one of our top instructors, Elisa Morell. Everyone's lines are muted, but if you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the question box, and we will answer them as we go through, and we'll also have plenty of time at the end for some general Q&A. So as we're going through, if you think of questions, put them in the question box, and we'll come to them later. This webinar will be recorded. We will archive it on our website, and we'll also email a link out to everyone, so you don't have to go crazy taking notes or anything. So just sit back, enjoy. And without further ado, I'm going to toss over to Elisa.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Road to Business School, the GMAT versus the GRE. My name is Elisa Morell, and I will be taking you through the slides that we have tonight. So this is just my information. I'm a master trainer for the Princeton Review, and I teach GRE and GMAT, LSAT, MCAT, you name it, I teach it, and tutor as well. So tonight we'll talk about the differences between the GMAT and the GRE. We'll also go through a few sample questions, and then we'll discuss ways that the Princeton Review can help. So traditionally, the GMAT was the standardized test that was used for business school, and the GRE was used for most other grad programs except for law school and medical school. Today, the GMAT it's basically all business schools will accept the GRE in lieu of taking the GMAT, and some schools do have a preference, however, so that's something that you want to check out. So if you're thinking that you're not going to take the GMAT and apply to business school, that you would take the GRE instead, you definitely want to find out what the schools prefer that you're going to be applying to. The GRE is now accepted by about 15 law schools as well. So you can take the GRE to go to regular grad school, you can take it to go to business school, and you can also use it to apply to some law schools. So the question always is, what's the point of having the GMAT or the GRE? What's the purpose of these standardized tests? And basically, for both types of programs, the schools receive more applications than they have spots, and they utilize your GMAT and your GRE scores to kind of weed through these applications. Most schools will use kind of a first cut with your standardized test score as well as your GPA. So we'll always say that a great score won't necessarily get you into a program, but a bad one can certainly keep you out because you won't make it through that first round of cuts. And so it just gives schools, they'll say they just need this another baseline measurement to compare their applicants, and that's what they utilize the test scores for. So in terms of the structure of the test, they're roughly about the same time. You can see that the GRE is 3 hours and 45 minutes. The GMAT has just recently changed. It's now 3 hours and 30 minutes. Basically, they both test kind of the same type of thing. So the GRE has 2 essays, whereas the GMAT has 1. The GRE has 2 math sections, roughly 70 minutes of testing time. So the GMAT is 62. GRE has 2 verbal sections, 60 minutes of testing time versus 65 of the GMAT. The GRE has a separate experimental section, which could be math or verbal, whereas the GMAT, the experimental questions are built in. The GRE is adaptive by section versus the GMAT, which is adaptive by question. Both of them are computer tests. So the GRE you're taking at a Prometric testing center, whereas the GMAT you're taking at Pearson VUE. The score range for the GRE, you'll get a separate score in each of your math and verbal sections from 130 to 170. Whereas the GMAT, you get an overall composite score of 200 to 800. You'll have raw scores for each of the math and verbal sections, but then they are changed into that composite score of 200 to 800. For both tests, you'll have a separate essay score, and then the GMAT also has this separate integrated reasoning section where you'll receive a score for that. And you can see the prices. The GRE is obviously a lot less. It's $205. The GMAT is $250. The GRE has a tendency to go up about $5 in price each year or every other year. The GMAT's been $250 for quite a long time now. So the GRE, as I mentioned, is adaptive by section. And basically what that means is that everyone receives a medium level first verbal section and first math section. If you do well on it, meaning you get the majority of the questions correct, you'll get a harder second section and your score range will go to the top. You could get a perfect score. You could score 170. If you do okay on it, meaning you get about half right and half wrong, you'll get a medium second section, but your score range will be capped. You won't be able to score into the 160s. If you do poorly on the first section, meaning you get fewer than half the questions correct, you'll get an easy second section and your score range will be capped even further. You won't be able to score beyond the 150s. So for the GRE, it's important to do well in both the first math section and the first verbal section so that you can get into that harder second section, because your score is based upon not only the number of questions that you answer correctly, but also on the difficulty of those questions. For the GMAT is adaptive by question. So basically what that means is that the computer adjusts to you on a per question basis. So essentially the computer's trying to get to know you. So the first question that everyone receives in the math section and the verbal section is a medium level question. If you answer it correctly, your score goes up and you get a harder question. If you answer incorrectly, your score goes down and you get an easier question. So at the beginning of the test, the computer really doesn't know anything about you, so the score can vary greatly. But as you're going through the section, the computer kind of understands what your capability is and your score, and it hones in on your specific score range. So your score is based upon the number of questions answered, the number of questions answered correctly, and the difficulty level of the questions, and the number of questions completed. So you can't skip, you can't go back, but earlier questions are more important to your score than later questions. So we always tell students to spend more time at the beginning of the section and speed up towards the end. But again, you will be penalized if you leave any question blank. So you should make sure that you answer every single question, but you want to make sure that you understand how your pacing works so that you're not just guessing on all of the last questions. So in terms of section order, with the GRE, you really don't have any flexibility. Your first section is always the same. It's the analytical writing assessment, which is comprised of 2 essays. Then after that, your remaining sections could be you'll have 2 math sections that count, 2 verbal sections that count, and that experimental section, which could be math or verbal. But these sections could appear in any order, and you don't have any control over that. The only thing that you'll definitely have is that your first section is the analytical writing assessment. With the GMAT, it's slightly different. You have 3 options. So you can determine the order that you want to see the section. So you could go with the analytical writing assessment first, followed by the integrated reasoning, the quantitative, and then the verbal, which was the original order of how the test was. But a lot of students didn't like that because you're sitting through an essay first for 30 minutes, then the integrated reasoning section before you get to your math section. So you can switch that up and decide that you want to do the verbal first, then the quant, and then the integrated reasoning, and leave the essay for the end, or the quant first and then the verbal. So it's really whatever you prefer. Most students do like either option 2 or option 3, but you should do the section that you feel that strongest with. Lots of students just like to leave that essay for the end because they feel like they don't want to waste their time with that at the beginning of the test. So the question we always get is, what is a good score? What's a good score on the GMAT? What's a good score on the GRE? And the answer to that is the score that gets you into the program that you're applying to. So you do want to do your research and find out, what the scores are for the schools that you're looking at. You do want to be within the score ranges that they have. But for your information, the average GMAT score is a 556. The average GRE math score is approximately a 153. The average verbal score is a 150, so that would put you in the 50th percentile. But depending upon the program that you're applying to, those scores might be fine. Other programs you might need scores that are much higher. So for instance, for the GMAT, for the top business schools, usually they're looking for a 700. So in terms of the math sections of both tests, you can see that they basically test the same thing: arithmetic, geometry, algebra, and data analysis. So neither test tests college math. They don't test calculus. They don't test trigonometry. It's basically the math that you would see in Algebra 1 and maybe a little bit of Algebra 2. The difference is in how the questions are presented, and the main difference is on the GRE, you have a 4-function drop-down calculator. On the GMAT, you only have a drop-down calculator in the integrated reasoning section. In the quantitative section, you do not have a calculator, so you're doing all these questions, these calculations by hand. So while the content is similar, the hardest GMAT quantitative questions are harder than the hardest GRE quantitative questions. So for those of you who are applying to business school, that's why many business schools prefer the GMAT, because they feel that the math questions are harder, and that would be reflective of a student who would do better in business school. And so oftentimes what we'll find is the only reason that students are taking the GRE is because they are concerned about the difficulty level of the GMAT math. So schools are aware of that. So if you're applying to a highly competitive school, you should probably take the GMAT. In terms of question types, they both have problem-solving questions. The GRE has quantitative comparison, which we'll talk about. Some questions are numeric entry, which are similar to the gridding questions that you had on the SAT. And then some questions are select all that apply, meaning there could be more than one right answer, but there's no partial credit. So there could be 2 right answers, 3 right answers, 4 right answers. You need to select as many correct answers as there possibly could be. The GMAT has a specific question type, like the GRE has a quantitative comparison. The GMAT has data sufficiency, and we'll go through both of those question types. So in terms of problem solving, about half of the questions in each quantitative section for both the GRE and the GMAT are problem solving questions. The GMAT, the questions will have 5 answer choices with only 1 correct answer. Again, the GRE has some questions that are select all that apply, or the numeric entry, which is a fill in the blank. The big difference right here with the GRE and the GMAT is there's no guessing penalty on the GRE, so you should never leave a question blank. Obviously with the GMAT, because it's computer adaptive, you have to answer the question. You can't not answer a question, so to move to the next question, you have to answer the question that's in front of you. So in terms of the differences between the sections, we'll kind of give you an example now of what it means for quantitative comparison. So for quantitative comparison on the GRE, these are questions that have 4 answer choices. So you're comparing quantities, quantity A and quantity B. If you think quantity A is greater, you're going to pick answer choice A. If you think quantity B is greater, you're picking B. If the 2 quantities are equal, you're picking C. And if the relationship cannot be determined, you're picking answer choice D. So in this question, you have this restriction, and it just says that X is less than 0, which is less than Y. In quantity A, we have X times Y, and in quantity B, we have X plus Y. So what we tell our students to do when you have questions with variables, plug in. So you want to plug in numbers that meet the question requirement. So obviously if X is less than 0, X is negative. If Y is greater than 0, Y is positive. So if you plugged in on this question, and let's say you plugged in for X -2 and you plugged in for Y +2. Then quantity A, which would be -2 times 2, would give you -4. And quantity B, which is -2 plus 2, would give you 0. So clearly 0 is greater than -4. So you would eliminate answer choice A because quantity A is not greater, and you would eliminate answer choice C because the 2 quantities are not equal. But you can't be assured that quantity B is always the correct answer. You should plug in a second time. And what we tell our students to do is use the mnemonic, which is frozen. right? So frozen stands for fractions, repeats, 1, 0, extreme numbers, and negative numbers. So it's a mnemonic that forces you to consider all the different possibilities that there could be for X and Y, right? So you might not have considered that X could be a fraction, or it could be an extremely negative number, right? We know that neither of them can be 0 because X is less than 0, Y is greater than 0. So what if we plugged in fractions? So if we made X negative 1/2, and for Y, instead of making it positive 1/2, which would not make sense because we already did symmetrical questions there before, -2 and +2. It wouldn't make sense to then try negative 1/2 and positive 1/2. We're kind of using an extreme fraction with Y, right? We're making it very small number, 1/100th. So it's greater than 0, but only slightly greater than 0. So now quantity A, X times Y, is negative 1/2 times 1/100th, which is negative 1/200. And quantity B is negative 1/2 plus 1/100th, which gives negative 98 200ths. So basically what we have here in this case now is quantity A ends up being greater, which we've already eliminated quantity A. So quantity B is not greater, so we'll eliminate quantity B. And the correct answer is answer choice D. The relationship cannot be determined, right? It depends upon what you make X and what you make Y. So the big thing for this is to remember that if it doesn't say that the variable is an integer, don't assume that they are. They could be anything. They could be fractions or decimals. And consider utilizing frozen to help you fully evaluate the question properly. For GMAT, you have questions that are called data sufficiency questions. And basically what that means is you'll have questions that have two statements, statement 1 and statement 2, and you have 5 answer choices. And it's not asking you for the answer to the question. It's asking you whether you have sufficient information to determine the answer to the question. So quantity A means that statement 1 alone is sufficient, but statement 2 is not sufficient. Answer choice B means that statement 2 is sufficient, but statement 1 is not sufficient. Answer choice C means that each statement alone is not sufficient, but together they are sufficient. Answer choice D, each statement alone is sufficient to answer the question. And then answer choice E, neither statement alone nor the statements together are sufficient to answer the question. So it's kind of difficult for students to juggle all those answer choices. But one thing to keep in mind is if statement 1 is sufficient, then you only have 2 answer choices that are possible, A, D. If statement 1 is not sufficient, then you have only 3 answer choices, B, C, E, right? So really what you're thinking about, as soon as you evaluate statement 1, you're at a 2/3 split. It's either A, D, or B, C, E. And that's how you want to think about this going forward. So let's look at a sample question. And it says, if y equals 75, what is the value of x? And I have these 2 statements. So let's look at statement 1. And statement 1 says x plus y plus z equals 180. Well, we know that y is 75, right? So we can determine from that that x plus z would equal 180 minus 75, or 105. But we can't determine the value of x on its own. We have no idea what that would be. So statement 1 is not sufficient. And since statement 1 is not sufficient, our answers now are B, C, E. So now we would look at statement number 2. Statement number 2 says x plus y equals 141. Well, since y is 75, we can determine that x is going to be 141 minus 75. So statement 2 is sufficient. You actually don't have to calculate it out because it's not asking for the actual value. It's just asking you whether you have sufficient information to determine it. Obviously, you could do that calculation if you wanted to. So 141 minus 75 is 66, but you don't have to worry about that. So it's going to be answer choice B because statement 2 alone is sufficient, and that's the answer to that question. So data sufficiency is a little bit confusing for students. You do want to view each statement in isolation, but again, if statement 1 is sufficient, your only answer choices are A, D. If statement 1 is not sufficient, your answer choices are B, C, E. So any questions on that? I know we ran through that a little bit quickly. I know sometimes it's a little bit confusing for anyone. No? Okay. Again, we'll answer any questions that you have throughout or at the end, however you want to go through this. In terms of the verbal section, this is where the tests are rather different. They both test reading comprehension, but the GRE focuses in, half of its questions are reading comprehension, the other half are really vocabulary driven. The GMAT does not have any vocabulary. So it has reading comp, which is about a third of the questions. It then has questions that involve arguments, and then it has questions that involve grammar, very similar to the grammar questions that are on the SAT or the ACT. The formats are different for each question type, and we'll give you an example of the text completion and sentence equivalence, as well as the sentence correction and critical reasoning questions. We're not going to go through reading comprehension. We don't want to bore you to tears here. So for the reading comprehension, 50% of your questions on the GRE involve reading comprehension, 30% on the GMAT. The big thing is that the passage appears on the left side of the screen, and then one question at a time appears on the right side of the screen. So it's a little bit difficult for students to get used to this, right? Because when you were taking the SAT or the ACT, you were able to highlight things or underline things, and you could see all your questions at one time. You could see the whole passage at one time. With both the GRE and the GMAT, sometimes you have to scroll down to see the entire passage. The GMAT again has 5 answer choice with only 1 correct answer. The GRE, some questions will have 5 answer choices. Some will have that all that apply scenario, which is similar to the math section, but for the reading comprehension, there's only 3 answer choices. So 1 could be correct, 2 could be correct, or all 3 of them could be correct. And then occasionally, usually 1 question per section, you'll have a question which is called select a sentence. So essentially the question asks, in which sentence, for example, did the author put forth his argument? You would then go through the passage and click on that specific sentence that answers the question, and that would be your response. So there's no actual answer choices on those types of questions. So in terms of the verbal sections, the GRE has these questions which are text completion. There are 6 in each section, 2 that have 1 blank, 2 that have 2 blank, and 2 that have 3 blanks. This is an example of a 2 blank question, and you can see for each blank you have 3 answer choices. You must get both answers correct. So you must get both words correct for blank 1 and blank 2 to get credit for the question. There is no partial credit. Text completions are comprised of, a few sentences with 1, 2, or 3 blanks. The strategy for going through these is to read through the sentences, focus in on the clues in the sentence, and come up with your own word for the blank. So this question says, the master blacksmith had to choose between his 2 apprentices, who were as blank as 2 young men could be. The first lacked awareness of the basic principles of metallurgy, but was incredibly blank. The second possessed great academic knowledge, but was not very adept with the hammer. So clearly the 2 apprentices are different. So for the first blank, different would be a good word to use, right? They were different as 2 young men could be. So as I look at my answer choices, I want something that matches different. So the first word, polemical, that has to do with like strongly critical controversies or disputes. So that would not be correct. Disparate would match different. Facile would not, right? So facile means agreeable or easily accomplished or attained. So for the first blank, I would pick disparate. So now for the second blank, I want to continue on with this difference. It says the first lacked awareness of the basic principles of metallurgy, but was incredibly blank. The second possessed great academic knowledge, but was not very adept. So clearly the first was adept, right? So I need a word that means the same as adept. So amiable, obviously amiable means friendly or someone who's able to get along. That does not mean adept. Proficient, right? That means competent or skilled. So that would go along with adept. And the third answer choice, prodigious, that just means large or enormous. So that does not match. So for this particular question, if you did not pick disparate and proficient, you would not get any credit for the question. All right. So again, vocabulary is pretty important on the GRE since half your questions involve vocabulary. The second vocabulary type of question on the GRE is sentence equivalence. You'll get 4 in each section. For these types of questions, it's just one sentence with one blank, and you're picking the 2 answer choices. It's always 2. You're selecting the 2 answer choices that give the sentence the same meaning. Your strategy is basically the same as for the text completion. You want to read through it, focus in on the clue, and come up with your own word for the blank, and then compare that to the answer choices. You don't want to read through the sentence 6 times, plugging in each of these words, because that would just take so long. So this sentence says, the photographer blank posed the bride for her portrait, carefully adjusting each fold of her dress and each curl of her hair before taking the picture. So it's important for you to identify who or what the blank is talking about. So the blank is talking about the photographer. Then you want to identify the insight that we have. So the insight is that he carefully adjusted each fold of her dress, right? So the word you would want to use is carefully, right? So the photographer carefully posed the bride. So I'm looking for answer choices that would match carefully. So meticulously, that could be used for carefully because it's showing great attention to detail. Frantically not, right? Because frantically means like you're just desperate with excitement. Subversively, no, because subversively basically means that you're undermining some power or authority. So we'll eliminate subversively. Hectically, again, kind of goes in line with frantically. If you're very hectic with something, you're frenzied. Fastidiously would work because fastidiously is very similar to meticulously, right? So that's careful attention to detail. So we'll select that one. And hysterically does not work, right? Because hysterically, again, if you're hysterical, you're kind of frenzied and crazed. So for this particular question, if you didn't pick both meticulously and fastidiously, you would not get credit for the question. You have to select both answer choices. So those are the 2 types of verbal questions that are on the GRE as well as the reading comp. For the GMAT, as we said, you have sentence corrections, and this is about 40% of the verbal questions. Basically what you have is a sentence and either part or all of the sentences underlined. And you're determining whether it's correct as written. If you think it's correct as written, you would pick answer choice A. If it's not, then you're going to select the answer choice that provides the grammatically correct answer. So the GMAT doesn't test all grammar rules. It basically focuses in on 6 main things. So it focuses in on verb tense. It focuses in on parallelism, misplaced modifiers, pronouns, subject-verb agreement, and idioms, right? So the first thing that you want to do is read through the sentence and determine whether or not there is an error, right? So this one says, while brokers, as a rule, are not permitted to know executive access codes, in many instances, they are widely known. So the underlined portion of the sentence starts with this plural pronoun they. So I can see that they, I'm looking now, since it's a pronoun, for agreement, and I'm looking to determine whether or not there's ambiguity. And so it's not perfectly clear who the they is referring to because I have brokers and I have access codes. So it could be replacing either one of those words. So this is a pronoun ambiguity error. So I'm going to eliminate answer choice A, but I'm also going to look to see if any other answer choices repeat that error, if there are obvious repeaters. And obviously answer choices B and C repeat that error, so I'll eliminate that. So now what I want to do is evaluate the remaining answer choices individually, looking for reasons to eliminate each. So answer choice D says the codes are by many, so it corrects they and gives us a specific noun, the codes, are by many able to be widely known. So although it corrected the original error, it introduced a new error by this verb structure of able to be known, which is incorrect. So I'll eliminate answer choice D, which leaves me with answer choice E, the codes are widely known, which is grammatically correct. So for that one, it's answer choice E. So that's how the sentence corrections questions are, basically testing those 6 grammar rules. And again, you could have part of the sentence underlined or the whole thing underlined. You're looking for the answer that makes the sentence grammatically correct. The other type of verbal question that you can have is critical reasoning. Essentially what critical reasoning is an argument. So you have this argument here, and then you have a question. So it says, you should always focus in on the question first. It says the conclusion of the argument above depends upon which of the following assumptions. So this is an assumption question. Some questions will be weaken questions or strengthen questions or inference questions. They're asking you about this argument and they're asking you about certain things that it does. So what you should do is read through the argument, and since it's an assumption question, identify the conclusion, the premise, and then determine what this argument is assuming. So the argument says many antiviral medications are effective at killing only some strains of the targeted virus. If only some strains of a targeted virus are killed by a given medication, there is danger that through random mutation or the emergence of other strains from natural reservoirs, resistant strains will gradually dominate those vulnerable to medication. If the antiviral medications are continually administered, for example, to humans or cattle, there is a significant risk that existing medications will grow ineffective, leaving doctors with no remedies for these diseases. So the conclusion of the argument is really in the last sentence, right? So the author's conclusion is there's a significant risk that existing medications will grow ineffective, leaving doctors with no remedies for these diseases. That's his conclusion. And so the premise, why does the author think that? Because really the sentence before, if only some strains of targeted viruses are killed by a given medication, there is a danger that through random mutation or emergence of other strains from natural reservoirs, resistant strains will gradually dominate those vulnerable to medication. So the clue here, though, the thing that you want to focus in on, there's a significant risk that existing medications will grow ineffective. So kind of the assumption is that, right, we've only have these existing medications, right? So they're assuming that we don't have anything new. So we're looking for an answer choice that talks about maybe there is something more than just these existing medications. So answer choice A says the same medicines are administered to both humans and cattle, right? So that's not an assumption of the argument. That's out of scope. So we'll eliminate answer choice A. Answer choice B says new medical developments will not effectively kill previously resistant strains. And so that's actually an assumption of the argument that there aren't any new medical developments that can work. So we'll hold on to that one. Answer choice C says existing viruses will mutate to form resistant strains where none had existed before. So that's kind of extreme language. So we'll get rid of answer choice C. Answer choice D says viruses cause more diseases than other forms of infection, such as bacteria, prions, and molds. We don't care about those things. That's out of scope. Answer choice E, biotechnology and drug companies will work to develop new medications that attack resistant viral strains. We don't know that that's true. We don't know that what biotechnology and drug companies will do. Then that's not an assumption of the argument. So we'll eliminate answer choice E. So the correct answer is that answer choice B, that new medical developments will not effectively kill previously resistant strains. That is an assumption of the argument. So finally, for both tests, you have the analytical writing assessment. And basically, these writing assessments just measures your ability to think critically and communicate complex ideas adhering to the standards of written English. So you have 30 minutes for the essay. Both tests have an argument essay where you're evaluating someone's argument, and the GRE has this additional issue essay. And essentially the issue essay, you're giving a very general prompt, and you're taking a position and supporting that position with compelling and persuasive examples. For both tests, you're utilizing a very basic computer processing, word processing system. You just have cut, paste, and edit. You don't have spell check or grammar check. So you're allowed to move things around. You just, you don't have those other options. We tell students to take a few moments to brainstorm, to think about what you're going to write, then formulate an outline, then type, and then save a minute or two to edit your essay. The essays are graded holistically, but if your essay is plagued with grammar and spelling errors, you're probably going to lose a point. For both essay types, you want to have a separate introduction paragraph, you want to have a separate conclusion, and then 2 or 3 body paragraphs. So the argument essay, you're just analyzing someone's argument and discussing reasons why the argument is not sound. And again, the issue topic, you're just focused in on a very general prompt and discussing whether you agree or disagree and the reasons for that. Since both tests are computer tests, you might not be familiar with how these test centers operate, and we just like to kind of forewarn our students about what you might encounter at these test centers. So the GRE, as we said, is at a Prometric testing center. The GMAT is at Pearson VUE. They're both very concerned with security in terms of nothing getting in that shouldn't and nothing getting out that shouldn't. You can go to either website, gre.org or mba.com, and read about the various security measures that are in place. But there are some things that are kind of similar to both. For the GRE, when you're taking that test, you'll be given 6 sheets of scratch paper, and you'll be given pencils at your station that you'll use to do all your calculations. For the GMAT, you're given laminated, they're sort of like laminated boards, whiteboards, and a fine tip marker, and that's where you're doing all your calculations. So the way the testing centers work, you can see you have a very, you walk in, you have a little lobby area. All of your personal belongings have to go into a locker. You can't bring anything in the testing room with you. So no food or beverages, no purses, no cell phones, obviously no calculators. Everything goes into these lockers. Your ID is checked. It has to match exactly the way that you've registered. So when you register, pull out your ID and make sure that you enter your name exactly the way it is on your ID. Some centers will have a palm scan. Some will have a finger scan. You're being filmed while you're there. They take a picture of you. You can see that you're in these little computer cubicles. You're being monitored the entire time. They do provide you with noise blocking headphones because there are people there taking different tests. So at the Prometric testing centers, you'll have people there taking Series 7 exams or TOEFL or Praxis. At the Pearson VUE, you also have people there taking MCAT. So you have a variety of test takers, and sometimes that can be distracting. So it does make sense to use the noise blocking headphones. So the main way for you to improve your score, obviously, is to know the content. So you want to master the core math and verbal content that would appear on the questions. You also want to learn the strategies, right? So you have to know how the test is written, how it's scored, and understanding the predictability of the test. It's important for you also to understand the technique. So the Princeton Review will give you specific techniques for each question type on the test, but you then have to practice that, right? So after you learn the correct techniques, you have to apply them over and over. You have to master them. Obviously, practice makes perfect. And if you do prepare properly and thoroughly, that will help to build your confidence, alleviate test anxiety. So all that practice will enable you to meet the challenges that either test presents. So we try to help you with all of those things.
So I'll chime in here a little bit, give you a little bit of a break. And just a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, type them into the question box. We still have plenty of time and we're happy to answer anything that you have. So really, it's our job here at the Princeton Review to help you get into your dream school and help navigate the whole journey. If you haven't been to our website, definitely check out tons of free resources to help you get started. So princetonreview.com. You can take a free full-length practice test for either the GMAT or GRE, or take them both and see which one you like better. You're not going to love either test, right? But just find out which one that you will score better on. And then if that school that you're looking for accepts that score, go for it. We also have a free business school search engine on our website. So again, if you're not sure what program you want to go into yet, you could search by the name of the school, you could search by state or different criteria, and we have a profile for each school. And included in that profile are things like average test scores, GPA information, financial aid stuff, and there's also a direct link directly to that school's website. So again, it takes some of that burden off of you and helps you start your search. Once you identify the school that you're looking for, you can start learning what kind of target score they're looking for, and then you can find out if you need to do any sort of prep, right? So if you take that free practice test, see where you're scoring, compare that to the target score at the school, and then you'll find out how much work you need to do to get to that target score. We have lots of different prep options. We also have some great try us for free opportunities coming up in May, so definitely check out our website for that. And then we also have homework help. So that's another great opportunity if you need help working on certain topics. So homework help, you could think of it, if you're an undergrad, you could think of it as a GPA booster. If you're out of school, you could think of it as it's an online academic tutor that's available 24/7. So you could log into our website anytime, day or night. So right after the session, if you want to, you can go to our website and be matched up with a tutor in less than 2 minutes. The great thing about this is you can upload questions, the tutor will work with you, and then you can log off. So you don't have to be on for any certain amount of time. There's also a free trial for this too. So again, definitely take advantage of that. And we have expert tutors in over 80 subjects. So again, if you haven't taken algebra in several years, this could be a great opportunity to work with a tutor to help you review all those great math fundamentals. And as far as test prep goes, we have options for every schedule and budget. It really depends on your individual needs, right? So if you're the kind of student that wants to work on your own, you could certainly, we have online self-paced options. So it's a great opportunity. You get access to all of our online tools and resources, and you just work through at your own speed. If you're the kind of student that needs the structure of a course, we have courses that are available in person or in a live online classroom. So again, depending on what kind of schedule works best for you. And finally, if you're the kind of student that works better in a one-on-one environment, we do offer private tutoring, again, both in person or in a live online classroom. So again, whatever works best for you. So check it out. Again, come up with what works best for you. And from there, we're here to help you.
There was one question. Someone asked whether it makes sense for a first practice test to take the whole test or a mini version to ultimately determine which test you may score higher in. For our free practice test, you're taking the entire test, which does make sense. It is important for you to take the whole test so that you can see actually how you will do. It simulates the actual test. That gives you a really good indication of what your baseline score is. So you compare both. So I know it is long to, to sit through both tests. Some students will skip the essays. You could do that. Again, that doesn't give you an idea of how you'll get through the whole rigor of the actual test, but some students just want to have an idea of how they'll do in the math section and how they'll do in the verbal section. So that would be an option, but I would not take a shortened version of the math or verbal sections, and I would sit through those entire sections. You do have the options with our test to like take a section and step away from it, but you really shouldn't. You should really just adhere to the breaks that are allowed, and that'll give you a pretty good indication of how you would score in an actual test.
Yeah, there's also a question about how the essays are graded. So we actually grade the essays for you as well. So just like the real test, when you take the math and verbal components, you'll get your scores right away. The essays will take a couple days. We actually have our instructors will actually grade them and give you feedback. So a great resource for free to give you an idea of how well you would score on the essays too.
And so for the essays, their score is 0 to 6. 6 means it's excellent, 5 is strong, 4 is adequate, 3 is kind of not quite adequate. Most programs are looking for you to, for GRE, most programs are looking for a 4 or above. For GMAT, 3 and change. Your essays are graded by 2 graders for the actual test, and they kind of average those scores. But they're looking for the quality of your thinking, right? Your ability to think about things from multiple perspectives, the quality of your organizing. So they're looking to see that your essay flows well, that you build from one thought to another, and then the quality of your writing. So they're looking to see that you use various word types and sentence structures that would apply to someone at the graduate level.
And I see some questions are coming in. So before we get to the rest of the questions, maybe we'll just go to the next slide, which is the quick poll, just to kind of get a poll of the audience that's been hanging out with us tonight here. So I will launch that real quickly and just give you a moment to kind of let us know if you'd like any more information about certain items here. So again, you could select all that apply if you're thinking about possibly applying for the GRE, the GMAT. Maybe if you want to shift gears, go to med school, take the MCAT, or if you're thinking about taking the LSAT for law school, or if you're just looking for help boosting your GPA. And again, while we're wrapping up this poll, please feel free to type some questions in the chat box. We have plenty of time. We're happy to answer all the questions that you have. All right. I'll give another couple seconds for the poll if you want to share your feedback. All right, let's close that out. All right, then if you want to go to the last slide, we'll answer whatever questions we've got here. All right, so Elisa, we have one question here about how long do you recommend from the end of a prep course and taking the actual test?
So it really depends upon how well you were staying caught up with the course. So if you were doing all your work and taking your practice tests when you should, then you should be, fairly caught up. Maybe you need like a week or two just to kind of solidify some of the things or, go over some concepts again. But for most students, we say, 2 weeks, at most a month after you finish a course. But, really we tell students within 2 weeks makes sense. Lots of students will say, I'm going to take the course and then I'm going to spend a whole month on my own, catching up with everything. That usually doesn't work out as well as they think. It makes sense to stay caught up while you're in the course so you can ask your instructor questions or, find out the answers right then. Students have a tendency to have great plans about things that they're going to do on their own time, but not actually accomplish them. So it really makes sense for you to take the test, fairly soon after the course is over.
Perfect. Okay, so we have another question here about do business schools prefer GMAT scores over the GRE? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but
yeah. So basically every business school will accept the GRE. When you talk to admissions people, they kind of prefer the GMAT. And as I said, the reason for that is the GMAT math goes to a higher difficulty level than the GRE math. Admissions people assume that the reason people are taking the GRE instead of the GMAT is because they're concerned about that math, the difficulty level of the GMAT math. So if you're going to an accredited program for your MBA, you're going to have to take statistics, you're going to have to take a finance course. And so they're concerned that you're not going to be able to do that level of math. So if they're picking between 2 applicants and one is only taking the GRE and the other's taking the GMAT, they're inclined to go with the person who's taking the GMAT. So I would say if you're applying to a highly competitive program, that you should take the GMAT. That would make you more competitive.
great. Okay, so like I said, we still have a few minutes. If anyone else has some questions, feel free to type them into the chat box there. In the meantime, Elisa, I don't know if you have any other words of wisdom, anything else that you can think of.
Yeah, our biggest piece of advice, well, there's 3 things. Always do your research. So research the programs that you're interested in, find out the types of scores that they're looking for, find out what they do if you take the test more than once. How do they treat multiple scores? Most programs will take your highest scores. And then definitely have a plan. So know when your deadlines are and have a plan for how you're going to get everything accomplished for your application, right? So there's a lot that you need for your applications, but basically for both programs, whether you're going for to take your GRE or your GMAT, you need to have your standardized test scores, your transcripts, letters of recommendation, personal statements, and probably an interview. So you want to make sure that you have all of those things in order, and definitely prep for these tests. Most students assume because they've got a great GPA that these test scores aren't that important. They actually are. You want to make yourself as competitive as possible. So take the time to prep. Most students, it takes them for the GMAT about 3 months of prep to get to the scores that they want. For the GRE, about 2 months of prep. But take a free practice test, get that baseline score, and that'll give you a good idea, like Scott said, of how much time you need to devote to this. If you haven't had a math class in a while, some of this math, although you've had it before, you just kind of need a refresher on that. And you also, it's again, for both tests, it's not just about answering the questions correctly, it's about answering questions efficiently, right? You only have a certain amount of time. You don't have all day to solve these things. So you want to learn strategies for answering the questions quickly. So prep will help you with that.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I guess as we wind down here, I just want to remind everyone, keep an eye on future webinars that we're doing. We are doing a GMAT session in June. So we're going to do kind of a deeper dive into the GMAT, do some more sample problems, have some more strategies. So keep an eye on that. And then every month we're going to have different sessions. So keep an eye on princetonreview.com/webinars for all that fun stuff. We also have some free online sample classes that you can do on our website. But again, take that free practice test. It's just a great starting tool. It'll help kind of get you jump started and give you a real idea of kind of where you are now. And then it'll help you plan ahead for your next steps. So I guess looks like we don't have any other questions coming in. So thank you so much, Elisa, for sharing all of your words of wisdom.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
All right, take care, everyone.